Coming to you from the offices of Vice Presidential Candidate Kamala Harris. Are you a cop? You know you have to tell me if you're a cop, right? I'm RJ Balde, and this is the TRICHOMES Hashitout podcast. On this show, we feature conversations about trending cannabis topics. We also bring in industry insiders and influencers to discuss their point of view. In this episode, I'll be talking to Dr. Paloma Lehfeldt about the work she does to promote medical cannabis education, outreach, and destigmatization for healthcare providers and patients. We'll also talk about a promising new deal for medical cannabis research, and much more. Without further ado, let's hash it out. Today, I am joined by Dr. Paloma Lehfeldt. Dr. Lehfeldt is the Director of Medical Education at Vireo Health and has over 10 years of experience in psychiatric research, community outreach, and education. Welcome to the show, Doc.
I am thrilled to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
I am thrilled to virtually be with you as well. Where are you coming through the sound waves from?
I am in the beautiful Rockville, Maryland. I'm about 25 minutes from our nation's capital, so great place to be.
Okay, great place to be indeed. With November coming up, lots of hubbub happening around over there.
I know. I'm upset that I can't be on the steps of Capitol Hill lobbying with the rest of them, but virtually everything virtual is national, as I like to say. So
true that. And how's your year been? I know that's a really loaded question to ask this year, but how has it been going for you so far?
I'm really proud to say that we've been making lemonade out of these lemons. Really taking advantage of this online presence. Really disseminating as much cannabis education and information as we possibly can, and getting it out there. Doing webinars, whether they be internal or external, and talking to physicians and patients across the country. So really enjoying this time at home, because I'm usually traveling a lot, but I just actually read this, saw this New Yorker cartoon that I shared with my team saying, am I working from home or am I living in my office? So we're feeling that too.
Ooh, those lines are getting kind of blurred nowadays, huh?
100%.
Yeah. So I understand that you are sort of the direct line of communication with providers and physicians at Vireo Health. And you organize outreach events, conferences, and lectures for both providers and patients. So you mentioned that you've been doing webinars. Has that been majorly affected by the coronavirus pandemic? Were you doing online events before, or has that sort of really taken off since the beginning of this year?
It's definitely taken off. It's something that I've actually really enjoyed doing. We just put on a women's health and cannabis educational seminar a couple of weeks ago. And it's just so great to see how many people come to these and really interact with us. Everybody wants to talk about cannabis, especially now. A lot of people are saying, how could I get through this pandemic without my medical cannabis or without my cannabis? So even if I have one person listening, it's worth it.
Yeah, true that. And you mentioned that, doing things online it makes what you're doing global, because it's accessible to anyone around the world who might have internet access. And so you never really know who that person might be, even if it is just one person who might find the information that you're sharing and find it to be extremely beneficial and exactly what they needed to find that they might not have been able to find up until then.
I mean, that's an excellent point. And that's my background in teaching. Even if one patient hears the information that they need to hear just to help them get through the day, I'll give that lecture 1,000 times.
Totally. And I was listening to a podcast that you were on recently, where one of the big questions that you had been wanting to answer was why physicians have not been taught about the benefits of cannabis or the endocannabinoid system in school. So how has that, is that improving at all, do you think? Or do you still think there is a vast lack of education there?
There's a vast lack of education. The most recent stats I've read is that 13% of U.S. medical schools are teaching about cannabis and the endocannabinoid system. I never learned about it in medical school, and I always say it's literally like not showing up for the couple of months we learn about the cardiovascular system or the nervous system.
Right.
Because the endocannabinoid system literally is interacting with all these other systems or organ systems throughout our body. So, so even my colleagues that I went to medical school with, they're coming to me for information. They're asking me, why didn't we learn about this? Is this even a thing? These are some of the most educated people, and they're missing a huge chunk of knowledge. And it's truly, truly unfortunate. And it's not until you really sit down and you have to go back to school and really start from the basics, learn about the physiology before really getting into the nuances of this amazing botanical that we have available to us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, so you weren't taught any of that personally in school? Did you had to seek that information yourself?
I sure did. Yes. I went to, my graduate degree prior to medical school is in biological psychology, cognitive neuroscience. And I wasn't taught about cannabis in that program either, except for as a drug of abuse, which is how we're taught about it in medical school as well. The signs to look for if you have a patient that is high on cannabis, red eyes, how to recognize that in the emergency room. How to test for THC on a urine screen. Those are the things we're taught on a clinical level and on a medical school level. So it's really hard to have this ingrained in us and not see it in our medical textbooks, which are the gold standard. Not see it in many peer-reviewed literature, and then say this exists and it's real and it's helping people. So it's that cognitive dissonance that occurs quite often, and something that we really try to overcome by destigmatizing and bringing research to cannabis, not making it this dirty word.
Yeah. And where do you think that came from? Because it is extremely, it's wild to hear from you that, the endocannabinoid system overall is just very widely ignored when it comes to educating upcoming doctors and physicians. Do you think that has largely to do with the public perception that has been adopted, say from negative stigma or the war on drugs or cultural view of cannabis? Because like you said, you were taught basically about the drug portions of it and the detriments of it and how to spot someone who's high. So do you think that has something to do with the cultural acceptance or view of cannabis?
1000%. I mean, before prohibition of cannabis occurred, this was in every physician's toolkit. It was treating opioid addiction, and as early as the 1850s. I mean, this was in ancient Egypt's papyrus. This was 27,000 BC. We see cannabis as a medicine, and it's not until Reagan administration with the Anti-Drug Abuse Act. It's not from Nixon with Controlled Substance Act that put cannabis on the map as this awful, Schedule I drug, which has no medical benefit, in the same category as heroin and peyote. In medical school, you're taught about them in the same way as a controlled substance. So having that stigma there, it's not easy to overcome, no matter how many times I stand on a podium or my colleagues stand on a podium and say, look at the side effects of this and look at the benefits of this compared to single drug pharmaceutical agents. When you really take the time to teach about where the stigma came from, and the story is long, and it's something that is necessary to talk about when you talk about cannabis. You have to talk about the history and the racial undertones beside the war on drugs in order to understand, why I wasn't taught about this in medical school, why this 70-year-old pain management doctor that I'm talking about the endocannabinoid system to doesn't believe me. It's inane.
Doesn't believe you in terms of what, like the when it comes to the medical benefits of cannabis, or when it comes to the existence of the endocannabinoid system?
Both. And that's
Wow, really?
both, 100%.
Wow, interesting.
Even a lot of the research, there are so many barriers to research right now because
Mm-hmm.
of the scheduling of cannabis, because of the DEA and the FDA, unfortunately. And the legislation is so antiquated, and to the extent that it's affecting education of practitioners, to the extent that people are so set in evidence-based medicine and how we're taught to treat disease by following the research, because there just isn't research out there to support the benefits of cannabis. It's hard for practitioners to adopt something that they just weren't taught about. And I was the same way. It's hard to accept something new when you're taught for 4+8, sometimes 8 years of training, and not taught about something like this. And it's really upsetting to hear, because chronic pain is the number one qualifying condition for cannabis, and research has shown time and time again the efficacy of cannabis on chronic pain. And when we think about other pharmaceuticals used to treat pain, whether it be opioids, whether it be NSAIDs, there hasn't been any new development by pharmaceutical companies since the 1970s, when naproxen sodium was developed, and that's Aleve. So from that time on, which is half a century ago, we haven't had anything new. And as we know, chronic pain is an epidemic, especially in the United States. And we just no longer have those tools in our toolkit to treat it. So now we have something there, whether it be an adjunct therapy or a standalone therapy. And, and not being pessimistic, because so many physicians are taking this on and adding it to their toolkit. And that's just something I love to see. And sometimes it just takes one patient coming to them and saying, I've been using this. I threw out half my opioids, or I decreased my dose by this amount. And physicians seeing that in their office, it's impossible to turn a blind eye to that.
Yeah. And it's almost, sometimes I feel like, more difficult to unlearn something than it is to learn something new. So like, if you're told, in medical school, or you see out in the wild world this negative perception of cannabis and all these warning signs and, crazy propaganda of like teenagers deflated on the couch or whatever, like it's hard to unlearn that if that's what you have been conditioned to seeing for so long, It
is. I mean, I hate talking in generals, but generalizing, but the picture of someone using cannabis is, a hippie or a burnout. Yeah. When in reality, our average patient age, for instance, in New York is a late 50s individual who has tried everything on the over the counter or prescription and just hasn't had results. And they come into our dispensary looking for that answer. And sometimes it's with their physician's guidance, sometimes it's not. But still, that stigma exists so much. And it's unfortunate, because the same person can walk into any CVS and buy a $6 bottle of opiates for $6 and be on their way. And that's and I say that all the time, because it's such a dichotomy, and it's so old. It's so antiquated.
Yeah, right? Yeah, it just seems exactly. It seems so antiquated. It seems like such a backwards way of thinking. We look we look throughout history and we're like, I can't believe people thought that back then, or I can't believe people believed that back then. And I have that feeling now, but it's like present. You know what I mean? Like, I can't believe people still think that way is what I feel a lot of the time. And that it can be a little disheartening, but there are signs of progress, which I try to choose to focus on a little bit more. And any sign of positivity, especially this year, is very welcomed to me.
There are so many signs of positivity, and I love.
Yeah.
I mean, my late 60-year-old parents are on board, which I never thought would happen. And because our seniors, our aging population is our largest growing demographic, they're the ones jumping on this medical cannabis trade, and it's really amazing to see when you talk about side effect profile of cannabis compared to all of the other treatments available. It's minimal comparatively, and some of the side effects are really desired. And again, when we start overloading our seniors with different pharmaceuticals, one of our epidemics in our country is polypharmacy. We're no longer treating the disease that we set out to treat. We're treating these side effects created by the pharmaceuticals. But what other single drug agent can treat multiple sclerosis, chronic pain, PTSD, anxiety, to name a few? Yeah. I mean, it's really amazing when you think about it. I don't call they're not qualifying conditions to me. They're indications, because cannabis really is a drug of 1,000 medications. When you think about all the different nuances within the plant, it's truly amazing.
Now, that just sort of made me think about this then. Do you think that might play as a threat to the pharmaceutical industries who thrive on, selling this new pill for that other pill that you're taking? If there's one natural substance that isn't manufactured that can sort of cover a wide array of things, do you think that might pose a threat to those who are running the pharmaceutical industry?
That's an interesting question. I would say absolutely. But in the same way, we want to be healthy, and I would love to think that pharmaceutical companies feel the same way. But if someone that has diabetic and has high cholesterol, if they start exercising, eating right, and we would assume that that's what our pharmaceutical companies want us to do, because that's going to make you healthy. In the same way that stimulating your endocannabinoid system naturally will do the same, but some people need that extra help. And to be healthy, it's important to look at yourself holistically, not just go for always what is recommended by your physician. There's so many different options out there. I don't know if I answered that directly enough for you, but that was perfect. Yeah. I also hope that they would side with the people and, not see it as a threat to their bottom line or their profits, and do some good and embrace the good that cannabis can bring in terms of medical benefits. 100%.
Yeah. I want to talk now about your personal experience and your personal history, and how you eventually now have ended up with Vireo Health. I understand that you went to Drew University for both psychology and music. Is that right?
I sure did.
Nice. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Side note, what kind of music? Like, did you have a focus and it was an instrument?
Or? I did vocals mostly, but I grew up classically trained pianist. I know that you're a musician as well. You do some musical theater.
A little bit. Yeah, a little bit. Not this year. That's for sure, with all the stages being shut down. But yeah, I've been known to stand up on stage and pour my heart out every now and again.
So cathartic, right?
Oh man, it's therapy. It's so much cheaper than therapy.
It really is. And I miss that as well. And cannabis and music go hand in hand. I actually was just reading, not to get too sidetracked, I was just reading an article about starling birds who are very communicative when they're singing to one another, but they also sing to themselves. It boosts their mood. And they found, researchers found that there was activation of the CB1 receptor of the endocannabinoid system in the ventral tegmental area, which, to simplify, is the endocannabinoid system is stimulated in one of the major brain areas for dopamine production. Dopamine is our reward neurotransmitter. So they found that the birds were really producing these dopamine responses with the endocannabinoid system when they sang to themselves. So I thought that was a great article. I can send you that if you're interested in it.
Please do. Like, I know you can't see me right now, but like my jaw dropped when you told me that. That's so awesome.
It's so awesome. I agree.
Wow. That is so dope. Yeah, please send me that. I would love to read it after we're done recording here. So okay, we got a little sidetracked, but so you went to Drew University for psychology and music. You mentioned you went to New York University for your master's in biological psychology, and then you went on to the Ross University School of Medicine for your doctorate. So can you tell me about how that, along with your experiences at places such as Mount Sinai Health System and Montgomery Medical Associates, led you to where you are now in working with cannabis?
Oh, yes. So I consider myself a lifelong advocate and student of cannabis. Throughout my training, I was never taught about it formally. In my undergraduate education, I wrote my honors thesis on delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol, which is THC. So I spent a lot of time learning about THC, which led me to my graduate studies, where I studied mostly neuroscience. I worked in animal labs focusing on subcortical structures involved in drug addiction. So really just focused on neuroscience research in with MRIs and other different imaging modalities. At the same time, I was teaching at NYU, which is really where what I feel I brought the most to cannabis, just because I have such a passion for it. So that was my first career. So I did a lot of research. I worked in labs and taught at the same time after I graduated. And I went to medical school later in life, not quite knowing if I wanted to practice clinically or if I wanted to really dedicate my career to cannabis. And I graduated from medical school in late 2017, and I joined Vireo pretty recently afterwards. It was just a great fit. Being a physician founded and physician-led company, Dr. Kyle Kingsley experienced firsthand the benefits of cannabis on one of his patients. Dr. Kingsley is our CEO and founder. He brought in Dr. Stephen Dahmer, who is my mentor, and he is actually who interviewed me, and he was just so passionate about cannabis research, and I just knew this is where I was meant to be. Not to sound cheesy, but really just being able to talk about these complex issues and sometimes not so complex to patients, to physicians, to support groups, to people that don't know anything about cannabis. Anyone that'll listen is really what brought me to Vireo. Their research portfolio is amazing, whether it's an NIH grant that they run out of their White Plains dispensary with Montefiore in the Bronx, focusing on opioid reduction, whether it be a PTSD study. Vireo really has this amazing research portfolio and brings medicine to cannabis, which a lot of other companies are not doing, having patient safety being the utmost priority. We actually have a post-surveillance marketing company that we work with out of Minnesota and New York, and patients can call if they're experiencing adverse events. And I don't know of another cannabis company that does that. Yes. Because again, even though the side effects are minimal, the side effects are there. There are certain times that people are going to feel paranoia or have that increase in heartbeat. And we need to make sure that we're available for them with resources to educate them about how to pick that right sweet spot for them. So
Right. Yeah, that's a great resource to offer those who purchased your Vireo's products, because I feel like I've experienced that too, where like there are so many cannabis companies out there that sort of like to lean into the science vibe or the medical vibe of things, and they'll sort of tout that in their marketing or whatever. But like if you kind of look further into them as a company, they don't really cite the scientific research that they talk about so much. And they don't really back it up with sources. And then they're also hard to contact. They're hard to communicate with sometimes.
100%. I mean, think one of the research projects we're involved with was with Dr. Angela Birnbaum out of the University of Minnesota, who found that if you eat cannabis with a high-fat meal, it can actually increase its bioavailability or effect on the body by 14 times. just small things like that. So eat your cannabis, not with a cheeseburger. I'm a physician, so I shouldn't say that, but with avocado or healthy fats. So
There you go.
Just things like, just small things like that really contribute to patients' holistic cannabis experience. So I can talk about research. I'll sing it from the rafters until I'm 120. I mean, that's the bridge to end that stigmatization of cannabis.
That's awesome. Now, I know you've been with Vireo now for over a year and a half, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And you are the director of medical education there. And then are you also the medical science and patient liaison, or have you sort of left that position?
So that was my position when I came on initially, but it's kind of expanded, and I'm really happy that it has. Just more to patient outreach. Initially, I came on to be the direct line to healthcare providers. Now I work closely with our sales and marketing team to bring that education to patients as well. It's so important to learn about ways to enhance your cannabis experience, what to do if you've taken too much, how to take a tea break, how to stimulate your endocannabinoid system just by taking a cold shower for 30 seconds. These are all amazing, right? These are all amazing little facts that I love. My favorite thing in the world is talking to a seasoned cannabis patient and teaching them something new, because cannabis patients know more than the physicians. A lot of time, it's truly amazing to take that ownership of what it is that you're putting in your body. And that's something that I love to see.
Certainly. And it's, with something like cannabis, it's so important to know exactly what is going in your body with the, multitude of ways in which you can consume cannabis. It's so important to know what is in that product exactly, and what, in addition to the cannabis, they've added to the product, which in some cases might not be good for you, but they might not tell you that in their marketing or how they're selling their products and things like that. So that's really great that you do that. Can you also tell me about the diversity, equity, and inclusion aspect of Vireo and what you do with that?
Yes, I would love to. So I always say, when you talk about cannabis, whether it be to whoever you're speaking to, it's irresponsible not to talk about social equity and diversity when talking about cannabis. Because just like we said, why wasn't I taught about this in medical school? This is why. Right. So Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee at Vireo is an internal committee. I'm one of the 3 leaders, and we're really excited about a lot of the projects that we're getting involved in, but including an internship, which we're going to be starting next quarter, hopefully, as well as presenting internally on some of our initiatives. But we are an incredibly diverse cannabis company. And one of our brands, 1937, which is available in some of our core markets, is related to the year of the Marijuana Tax Act, which is the year that cannabis was federally prohibited. So we really are taking that brand and standing on the right side of wrong, really bringing knowledge to that date, to that fact, to the horrible injustices that were caused. Because at the end of the day, it's 2020. Marijuana laws are not applied and enforced in the same way for all people. And that's something that I will always say. Black and brown communities are 4 times more likely to be arrested for possession. So it's important to talk about that. These products are available to people in dispensaries, but the same products that people are buying legally have people put in jail for 30 years. And it's important to, I know M4MM, which is an amazing organization, is starting a legal equity fund, and a lot of these other organizations are as well. So that's something Vireo Health is behind and supports. And I really dedicate my career to educating about these inequalities as well.
Yeah, that is so important. I've said it before. I certainly agree with you that the social equity aspect of cannabis and cannabis legalization tends to be a secondary conversation. I feel like, the hype is always with new businesses and innovations and new products and new extraction methods, all that shiny sort of exciting stuff. But when it comes to addressing the systemic historical wrongs that have been implemented in this country and throughout the world, and how to fully reckon with that history and correct our mistakes, isn't a conversation that I feel like everyone's ready for.
Right.
Still.
You're absolutely right. But as a cannabis consumer, you need to not only be educated, but you also need to be an activist.
Right. Cannabis just in general is, it's used to, in many ways, open people's minds to new perspectives and meet new people and join certain communities and include others. And so, yeah, I completely agree with you that it's certainly important to be a conscious consumer.
Yes, I like
and
that.
to fight for those who don't get to partake in the same benefits as you do when it comes to cannabis legalization.
That's a great point. I couldn't agree with you more.
Absolutely. Now, can you also tell me about the work that you're doing to deschedule cannabis? Because that also is very important.
Sure. So I work a lot with the National Cannabis Industry Association. Right now I'm working on a white paper for medical cannabis with a great team of scientists and physicians across the country. And the end goal of that paper is really to put in lay terms what medical cannabis is doing for us as the U.S. population and presenting it to our legislators, hopefully to show them, this isn't just about people getting high. This isn't about this antiquated perception that a lot of our legislators have, that this is a plant that is put in the same category as heroin, which kills 113 people every day. Opioids, right? Like when have we ever learned about a death from cannabis? It's virtually impossible. So just that statistic alone, putting that in front of our legislators is of the utmost importance. So being involved with policy, and a lot of people on the Hill want to reschedule cannabis, which would create its own problems. When this is, compared to many other pharmaceuticals out there, the side effects are benign. And I don't want to say that they're non-existent, because they absolutely are. Just like every other thing that we put in our bodies, there is a shadow side of cannabis as well. There are people that can experience cannabis use disorder, and there are certain populations that should never consume cannabis, such as people with a history of psychosis or a heart attack. And those are things that we want to bring to light as well. Not just saying that this is a miracle, because it's not. So really bringing that holistic picture of the plant to the desks of our policymakers.
And see, that's important too. I also feel like that's something that's not commonly spoken about is, a lot of the times it's polarized, where there'll be people that are like, it's either all bad or it's all good. And those who advocate that cannabis is all good, it's a miracle cure for a multitude of things, a lot of the times don't like to have that conversation that there is, like you said, that shadow side to cannabis, that it's important that is addressed, that cannabis doesn't work for everybody. And, some people are more prone to, like you said, cannabis use disorder or experiencing anxiety or paranoia or negative side effects when it comes to cannabis. I feel like it's a conversation that a lot of people don't want to have, because I feel like they feel like that might weaken their support or their advocacy for the use of medical cannabis. Do you agree with that? Do you feel similarly?
I do. And I think that's a completely natural reaction to have, especially with some of these people. Cannabis really has changed their life. But again, and it's much gentler on our bodies compared to these other options that we have out there. But again, it's important to recognize that there's no such thing as a miracle drug. There's no such thing as something without side effects. But like everything else in life, we have to think about a pro-con when we talk about these things, positive versus negatives. And the positives for most people greatly outweigh the negatives when it comes to cannabis.
Certainly. Yeah, that's for sure. And like you said, the side effects as opposed to the potential side effects from, say, opioids or something like that. I don't think you can weigh them on the same scale necessarily.
No, but we talk about opioids, right? But that's the tip of the iceberg. Again, pain.
Right.
When you talk about NSAIDs, when you talk about our Advil or our Aleve, nobody just takes one Advil and Aleve. And what happens when you get older, your kidneys are no longer to metabolize these as quickly. So a lot of times it can cause nephrotoxicity or kidney damage. It can cause arrhythmias in the heart. Even Tylenol has the potential to cause liver toxicity. So all of these over-the-counter medications that are really labeled as being benign are not so in certain populations and really need to be, even with ulcers, with NSAIDs. I mean, these are all things that are very apparent. Again, nothing is without side effects.
Absolutely. And that just emphasizes the importance to keep advocating for this, because, every time I hear about it, every time I'm reminded about how the medical use of cannabis is still something that has to be advocated for, while there are these over-the-counter drugs that have these potentially awful side effects. Like it still blows my mind just to be reminded of that on a daily basis.
Oh my gosh, I know, 100%.
Now, can you also tell me about the Vireo spectrum? So circling back a little bit to the products that Vireo offers, I understand that they are produced sort of on a spectrum. Can you explain to me how that works?
Sure. So Vireo is one of our brands, and it's really the first brand that we developed, and it has a spectrum having to do with CBD to THC content. So it's on a rainbow, which is really user friendly. And what I love about it the most is that our average patient isn't going to say, "I want a 19-to-1." THC to CBD. However, they will remember that the Vireo Red helped them with this type of pain or helped them sleep, whatever it is. So it ranges from a red, which is our highest THC content, down to an indigo or even a violet in Minnesota, which is the opposite of 19-to-1 CBD to THC. So really, and in the middle, there's a green, which is a 1-to-1. So really finding that sweet spot. And what's amazing about the spectrum from a medical standpoint is that some people layer their medications, whether it be form of delivery or whether it be different cannabinoid ratios. So in the morning, someone may require a 1-to-1 to get them through the day, a chronic pain patient, for instance, and taking something like a soft gel or a capsule, where the duration that it lasts is 4 to 8 hours in the body. So you can take one of those and it can help with your pain. And we have breakthrough symptoms, whether it be a spasticity attack and multiple sclerosis, which are incredibly, incredibly painful. Sometimes you need that extra THC to really have that pain subside. And vaporization offers a very immediate onset of action, meaning that it takes about 1 to 3 minutes to have that effect on the body. So having those different ratios, having those different formulations really create that holistic healing picture for our patients.
That's really great that, Vireo has sort of made that easily understandable for patients, because like you said, it's a lot easier to remember that the red product helped you more than like the 19-to-1 ratio, or like this specific strain helped me. Because also I feel like, people will be like, I like this strain, I like this specific strain. But I know from my personal anecdotal evidence and experience that, like, I've smoked the quote unquote same strain, or I've consumed the same strain from like different places, and it hasn't felt the same. You know what I mean?
Right, because that's the difference. That's why it's so nuanced and complicated, endocannabinoid system. If you didn't sleep well the night before, if you drank, if you exercise, these are all going to affect the upregulation of our receptors and how we respond to cannabis. So that's why I always tell patients how important journaling is. So you can really understand. If you ate a high-fat meal, think about all of these things. It's really not the same as taking a single drug agent.
Right.
It's taking a symphony of different cannabinoids within the body and seeing, and there it's going to be a different experience from person to person and even intrapersonally.
And that's again another thing that I don't feel like is spoken about as much is a lot of people look to outside things to sort of solve what's going going on inside of them without sort of embracing the need that you have to also have to make changes. Like, you can't just take a supplement or take a pill or take some cannabis and like that'll just solve everything. Like, everything goes hand in hand. So like you said, it depends on how you're sleeping, how you're eating, whether you're getting enough physical activity during the day, mental stimulation. All of these things also play a role. And I think sometimes patients, they'll just look to something and they'll be like, I think if I take this, that will just solve everything, instead of also having at least a partial focus on the necessity to make lifestyle changes or improvements.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's why a lot of the research is going into the pharmacogenomic sphere right now, I'll call it, because it's genetic. Some people metabolize things quicker. Some people are more susceptible to the addictive potential of THC.
Mm-hmm.
So these are all things that we're starting to study now to really understand the difference, why this strain works for you, but it doesn't work for me.
Mm-hmm.
While this terpene is activating for me and makes you feel sedated. These are all differences within ourselves. And it's really, truly fascinating and amazing. It's a really great time to be here. And you can tell in my voice how excited I am.
Yeah, there's a lot to be optimistic for, I feel like, that's for sure, in terms of research and progress. And, cultural shifts are hard things to turn, especially in this country, but it's that continued effort and continuing to keep the foot on the gas that continues to move the needle to where we want it to be and where it needs to be too. Now, on Vireo's YouTube channel, there's a short video of you sharing an introduction to the endocannabinoid system. You mentioned that the ECS, the endocannabinoid system, is our body's way of maintaining homeostasis. Now, you also have a background in psychology and psychiatric research, which we mentioned earlier. So what are your thoughts on the efficacy of cannabis use for mental health? Does it play a role in maintaining mental homeostasis or balance?
It 100% does. This is one of the lectures I'm most proud of that I gave is to the DC Psychological Association, which I presented continuing education to them. So they actually got credit for learning about the endocannabinoid system. So the two spheres in which cannabis has been studied the most is PTSD and anxiety. And they've been doing in human subjects as well. Unfortunately, it's very hard to perform RCTs, the gold standard of research, but observationally, our veterans have benefited so much from cannabis. I want to give a shout out to Veterans Initiative 22 in Maryland, which works really hard to end that stigma with veterans suffering from PTSD and other mental illness. And they offer a 22% discount at the dispensaries because every 22 minutes in the US, a veteran commits suicide. Wow. So this is a conversation that we need to have. And psychologists should be certified providers when it comes to cannabis because there's so many patients that have turned, whether they suffer from anxiety, PTSD, depression, or even some of our other psychological ailments. And it helps them with anxiety symptoms. It helps them because another thing that we don't talk about is that these diseases, these psychological ailments are multifactorial. It's not just anxiety. It's affecting your sleep.
Right.
It's affecting your work. It's affecting your daily living activities. So this is why I always say that patients are more educated than the people that should be recommending a lot of times because they found what works for them. And it's absolutely about maintaining that neurological balance within the brain as well. So cannabis kind of acts as a brake for the body. So I talk about it in my video. I talk about it all the time. It's literally when things are getting too loud, the endocannabinoid system has that ability to go in and turn that volume down. And when I talk about the volume, I'm talking about the overfiring, whether it be overfiring of glutamate, which is our excitatory neurotransmitter, which is overactive in seizures, whether it's serotonin in depression. There's so many different nuances that cannabis can act, and gently it works on different receptors in the brain, tone that down. That's why a lot of people with ADHD microdose with cannabis, which is a whole other aspect of research, which we are passionate about at Vireo as well.
Right.
But mental health is my passion, and I'm seeing more and more research on cannabis and mental health, and I'm thrilled that it's getting out there and that there's such an interest in it in the mental health community.
Same, and I'm glad that you're encouraged by the research that you're beginning to see, because that's something that I try to pay very close attention to. Also, is new research when it comes to the efficacy of cannabis with mental health and psychiatric conditions and things like that. Now, speaking of the research, did you hear about the recent deal with Parallel and the University of Pittsburgh, or Pitt? Did you hear about that deal?
I sure did. Yes.
Yeah. So for those who are listening who may not be familiar, Pitt, the University of Pittsburgh, struck a $3 million deal with the cannabis brand Parallel to fund a 10-year medical cannabis research agreement. So what can you tell me about that, and what are you hoping comes from it?
I know that there's going to be a huge push for cannabis treatment for sickle cell disease and chronic opioid therapy, which is amazing. For those out there that don't know, sickle cell disease affects mostly Black Americans, Black people around the country. So again, this is something that's going to bridge that gap. A lot of times there's a stigma associated with drug-seeking behavior in certain populations. And a lot of these patients, again, have been maxed out on so many different pain medications, and they turn to cannabis. So having this available to doctors to end that stigma is going to be of the utmost importance. And I'm so happy. Anytime I see anything about opioid reduction, it's amazing. Again, this is an epidemic in our country that really needs to be addressed. I don't think cannabis is the answer, but cannabis is something that will absolutely aid in reducing opioid intake in patients suffering from chronic pain.
Right. Yeah. It certainly might not be the end all be all, if you will, but it is certainly a large stepping stone that, when I heard about this deal, I was very encouraged by it. And I hope that, over the course of 10 years, we experience some great research results, and hopefully it translates into some meaningful change and more access to this sort of these medical benefits for the people who really need them and can really benefit from them and improve their life, the quality of life, rather. Now, do you think that this deal could potentially encourage more physicians to recommend medical cannabis?
Oh, 1,000. Yes. Okay. All research does. Again, evidence-based medicine is how healthcare practitioners are taught to practice medicine, meaning they follow algorithms to avoid side effects and to avoid interactions with other medications. And the algorithms that they follow, or the treatment plan, is based on years and years of research. So your doctor is going to, if you go to Dr. A and Dr. B with the same condition, they're most likely going to recommend you the same agent to treat and the same dosage to start off on, because it's a stepwise process. So when that is available for cannabis, I mean, the sky's the limit. Right. They'll have that information in their back pocket, in their white coats, and be able to really add that to their toolkit for a holistic approach for their patients. So yes, absolutely. And I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, me too. I want to live in that world.
Me too. Hopefully it's in less than 10 years, right?
Hopefully so. Yeah, hopefully so. What are your predictions? So what What are your predictions for the trends in terms of medical cannabis? You know, with everything going on this year,
Right.
with this new research deal, what are your predictions for how things are going to go in the world of medical cannabis? And if they're different than your predictions, what do you hope will happen? What's your perfect scenario?
Well, most of the market, first of all, a lot of the states that we see that are medical are going to become recreational in the next 3 to 24 months, which is amazing.
Yes.
Additionally, it depends who we elect in November to see those changes, but there is an uptick, a major exponential uptick in physicians and other healthcare practitioners' interest in cannabis. And that's been shown statistically with PubMed searches, which is one of the databases for research articles. It's increased 20-fold since in the last 10 years with physicians searching health benefits for cannabis, pain in cannabis. So it can only go up from there. I think, again, once it's going to spread like wildfire, once one physician sees one patient and tells their colleague about that one patient who sees another patient, it'll just spread. And I've seen that firsthand, and I love seeing it. So, you know, destigmatize, deschedule, educate, advocate, all of those things in the industry will bring cannabis to the forefront of our treatment plans for patients that truly will benefit from the botanical.
Certainly. So you're optimistic about the future. That's good.
Oh, I sure am.
I love that. Awesome. Well, Dr. Lehfeldt, thank you so much for taking this time to have this conversation with me. It was enlightening, and I am so grateful for the work that you're doing, again, to destigmatize medical cannabis and to spread this advocacy and this education and this research. And, you know, the work that you're doing is just so great in terms of fighting and advocating for patients to find the relief that they need with cannabis. And so I thank you so much for the work that you're doing. And I thank you for having this chat with me today. Before we go, where can our listeners find out more about what you're doing, keep up with you, and also keep up with the work that you're doing over at Vireo?
Sure. Follow me on Instagram. I always post a lot of cannabis educational resources. It's Dr._Paloma. You can also follow us on Instagram at Vireo Health, as well as www.vireohealth.com. We post up-to-date research and information about cannabis, including all of our ancillary brands, 1937, Lightbud, and Options. DM me, stay in touch. Would love to hear from everyone out there.
No doubt. Yeah, I'm going to DM you in a second. I'm going to ask you for that research article that we mentioned at the top of the show or the middle of the show.
Excellent. Excellent.
Right on. Well, Dr. Paloma Lehfeldt, thank you again so much for having this conversation with me. I really appreciate it, and I hope that you stay safe, and hopefully we'll be able to see each other soon in person.
I hope so. Thank you for sharing your time with me, and I'm very impressed that you pronounced my last name right.
Yes. Oh man, I was practicing. Don't you worry. I looked up like the other podcasts you were in, and like I ran that through Google, and I really wanted to make sure. Yeah.
Awesome.
That's my research. Yeah. Don't let anyone tell you that I don't do my research.
Love it. Thanks.
No doubt. All right. Have a good one. Take care.
You too. Bye-bye.
My thanks again to Dr. Paloma Lehfeldt for joining me. If you are a member of the cannabis community and have a story you want to share with us, we would love to hear from you. You can reach the show at hashitout@TRICHOMES.com. You can help others find the show by taking a moment to subscribe to the podcast and write a review. You can also join the discussion with industry insiders and get your voice heard by joining the community at TRICHOMES.com and following us on all social media. Hash It Out is produced by David Fortin and presented by TRICHOMES.com. I'm RJ Balde. Thanks for listening.